I am very excited today for a number of reasons. My name is Randy Ternowski. I'm Director of Research at Handshake. And today, one, it's Friday, so that's very exciting, and it means a lot that you all are here right now and deciding to spend your Friday with us. Two, we get to talk about a topic that is very interesting and compelling for me personally, and I hope all of you, the future of entry-level roles in an AI economy. And third, I get to talk with Christine Cruz-Vergara, who's our Chief Education Strategy Officer. So Christine, you want to say hi?
Hey, Randy. Excited to be here with you this morning. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, super excited. For those of you that attended last week, we talked a little bit about our research when it comes to Gen Z and their usage of Gen AI. And this week we're going to expand it a little bit, talk about the topic du jour, which is AI coming for jobs? So just a bit of context to start off with. We can talk about our research and where it comes from. So on this next slide, you'll see Handshake Network Trends takes data from our entire network. So that is kind of behavioral and platform data of students and alumni interacting with employers, interacting with schools, interacting with students and jobs. So there is just a lot of data points every day, millions of data points every day that we're really thinking about. And we believe it has something to say. We can contribute a lot to the conversation. Additionally, we run two surveys representative of college seniors every year. So that gives us a sense of how students are feeling. And so you're going to see data from both of those placed in conversation with what's going on in the economy. So before we really dive in, I do want to get a poll of the chat. And one thing we really like to do, especially because it's Friday, is just really share in the chat because you are all very much experts in this space. Share your thoughts on the future of early talent in the AI economy. So Christine and I will be talking a lot about this through the presentation, but it's always really interesting to open up the conversation to everyone in the chat. So please let us know how that's feeling, and we'll dive right in. Okay. So I'm going to split this into three sections. The first one will be talking about the big picture. What is happening based on Handshake in the economy and the labor market? The second will be a bit more about how students are being impacted by that. And the third will be what we see as the future in the economy and in the labor market. So the big picture right now, I think I shared this out last week, but I think it's relevant here as well. There's a lot of discourse happening on AI and early talent. I see, in my opinion, digital natives and early adopters will utilize new tools. There's a lot of ways we can be talking about AI and early talent. I put it into three buckets. The first bucket is the narrative that AI is eliminating early talent, that it's all going away. The Wall Street Journal posting that AI is wrecking an already fragile market for college graduates. The question from the Financial Times about is AI killing graduate jobs? I think we're all very invested in that question. I also think it's a very intense one, but it also comes at a time when there's another thread coming through, another narrative, and that is that Gen Z is leading the AI revolution. In the same day that this first Wall Street Journal article was posted, a different Wall Street Journal article came out that was saying that 20-year-olds coming out of college with AI skills are making to $1 million a year. And interestingly, in Silicon Valley, founders are getting younger and younger. The average age of a YC founder has dropped from the 30s to the mid 20s. So you have two threads already with AI and early talent that are very different. And then the third one that I think is we're all invested in is companies are and aren't making efficiency gains from AI. You see Goldman Sachs saying that AI is already showing positive signs of boosting GDP and productivity, while an MIT study is saying that 95% of pilots around generative AI are failing within companies. So there's a lot to talk about here. And I think the big takeaway for me, and I'm curious, Christine, if you have any takeaways, but for me, the big takeaway is that anything that just says AI is doing this, full stop, that's it, is not really fully there. But Christine, I'm curious how you feel.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't tend to personally put a lot of stock in the super
Mhm.
hyperbolic statements, and there are so many hyperbolic statements that are floating around right now, from, the elimination of all early talent, the bottom rung of the ladder going away, 50% of all white collar jobs being replaced by AI. I mean, it literally runs the gamut. I think the reality is Obviously, AI is here.
Yeah.
AI is going to supplement many roles in all industries. It is something that we all, early talent and even ourselves, not in early talent, must learn and must figure out how to use effectively. But I think it is honestly too early to really tell
Mm,
what the full impact will look like. I think the other thing to keep in mind, though, is all of us on this call have some level of power and influence over how it will impact
mm,
early talent and how it will impact all of our workforces. AI doesn't naturally replace all of
mhm.
us by ourselves. We are
Yeah,
all in various leadership positions and can help advocate for how it should be used or how it should supplement human talent within the workplace. And I think my last thought is what a lot of these articles fail to cover is actually the consumer interest component of this. Just think for a moment, any of the brands like Randy that you typically buy things at, whether it's
yeah.
a service or it's a product, do
Mhm.
you only want to interact with AI? Do you only want to interact with AI agents if you have a problem and you need to talk to support or you need to return something? I would venture to guess no, you would actually like to have some human interaction. And I think a lot of us as consumers still want some level of human. And I think companies are going to have to think about that component too of what their customers actually want, what type of experience they want. So I think it's mixed. And I think we should all be reading multiple perspectives so that we can truly form our own opinions around what this should or could look like.
I love that. And I love that. I think for me, the salient point about agency that like this doesn't happen. We tend to anthropomorphize like the technology. It's going to do this. It's eliminating all this, but there are very much humans around this. So I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Just shouting out some of the comments. Number one, Anna saying that she is loves how I'm providing references. So we'll continue to do that. But I think there's already a lot of conversation happening in the chat and would love to encourage that. Barbara saying that the media says the same thing in the early 90s, that like we've been through cycles like this before where conversation is happening. It's useful to bring up those touch points. So the next slide kind of goes into a bit of what you were saying, Christine, around like let's look at how handshake data stacks up with Bureau of Labor Statistics data and also other factors. So what you're seeing on the chart right now is an index of the job postings on Handshake in blue. You're seeing an index of the JOLTS, Bureau of Labor Statistics job openings data. And so just following those two to start off with, we index it on February 1st, 2020, right before a lot of the impact of COVID hit. You're seeing kind of a seasonal natural dip. You're seeing suddenly an increase, and that's coming from, in many ways, we know there was an infusion in the economy of a lot of money. There was a lot of folks at home, and tech really benefited from that. There was a real takeoff of hiring and whatnot. And then you're seeing in April 2022 in the gray lines, in between in that gray box, there were 7 interest rate hikes. So it made the cost of borrowing money increasingly harder. So there was a kind of turn down from that really heated moment after 2020. And then you're seeing that all the way to the current moment. You'll notice that handshake data and larger labor market data are pretty in line. Uh, and it seems like it's attached pretty closely to what's happening with these interest rate hikes. So that's one factor to consider. I'll add in one other piece, which is that green line. That is Google search index trends of how often generative AI is used in Google search terms. You'll notice that in January 2022, right around the time that ChatGPT landed, that really took off. Okay. I bring this up because it's worth thinking about how economic factors as well as generative AI can really impact how hiring is going on. There was a post I saw which was like thanking Sam Altman because it was this idea that like he released it at just the right time to make it very, very difficult to attribute what is the impact of AI, what is the impact of the economy right now. And so the takeaway here for me is that it is kind of difficult to parse that out in a very clean way. And that's true in handshake data as well. When you go to the next slide, you'll see um, this split on handshake data about exposed roles. So industries that were exposed to AI, so things like tech. Over the past year, there has been a decrease year over year in posting in entry-level tech roles, but that's also true for a number of other industries as well. This is not necessarily unique to tech here. And so it suggests to us in a similar way, it's really hard to parse out and have a takeaway for is this an AI thing? It's not something that I think you can easily attribute right out of the box. And so for Christine, I'm curious, like, how are you talking to, or what are you hearing from employers or higher education just around the impact of AI to gut check that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a little bit different in the two different spaces from a higher ed perspective. And I'm actually
Mm,
in Arizona right now at an ASU conference on agentic AI and student success. And so I've been talking to a lot of
mm,
our higher ed colleagues right now around how they're thinking about all of this. And for them, there's a really big question about what do employers really want? And what do they mean when they say, I want an AI native or an AI ready student?
mm,
So that's a big question that our higher ed partners have for the employers on the line. And I would actually love to see any comments in the chat around how you or your company defines AI ready and what does that
mm,
mean? Because that's a huge question for our higher ed partners in what does it actually look like? What are you assessing for? What does that mean?
mm.
I think on the employer side, um, the biggest probably takeaway that I hear across, again, different sizes of companies and different regions of the country and even different sectors or industry areas is most employers are experimenting with AI in like a functional area or two first. They're not trying to like take off, take the whole ocean. They're really saying like, okay, maybe we're going to look at it within our like engineering team first, or we're going to look at it within our sales function, or we're going to look at it within marketing. And they're figuring out in kind of a smaller scale what that means or what they want to do with that. And then starting to figure out how to scale. And there's still a lot of question I'm finding from employers around what does this really mean in terms of headcount? Are we really saving money? Are we really increasing efficiency? Um, is the efficiency sort of trade-off worth it in terms of what we can have our employees do with that time saved? So I think those are a lot of the conversations that I'm mostly hearing at the moment around this impact both on both sides.
That's interesting. And I think that is also a good takeaway to being like, none of these conversations are like, what do we do? We're just not thinking about that anymore. It's very much what are the skills that these
Mhm.
students are coming out with and how do we define and identify that? And also, how do we implement it in the organization? They're far more nuanced and frankly boring conversations than like, oh my God, this entire thing is going away. It's tactical, it's strategic around like, how do we get better about sensing the signal? So that's really
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah, and I love the answers that are coming into the chat.
Mm,
Deborah, especially, I think what Deborah's also talking about is one of the most, I think, underrated skills at the moment sometimes, but will become one of the most important in an AI world, which is like judgment.
yeah.
You have good judgment and discernment around what it is you're pulling. So that's great. Keep them coming.
Yeah, no, I think discernment has been like the word of the year for me for sure. Um, I love that. Okay, so you know what? We talk about that, and I think the big takeaway from that first section is that like there is not as much as we might wish or not wish, there is not a very clear signal that AI is doing this full stop. It is far more complex and far more nuanced, is the claim that we'd like to make. But regardless of that, from the student perspective, students are very much feeling that. And I think that is very useful to be thinking about how the impact of this conversation is tracking with students in early talent. So on the first slide, you'll see one thing we do with our surveys is look at every class year. We understand at the beginning of their senior year, at the end of their senior year, how are you feeling about your career given the job market and the economy?
Mhm.
Uh, this has been kind of a record low in terms of sentiment. More than 60% of the class of 2026 students are somewhat or very pessimistic about their careers compared to half in 2024. We've been doing this since 2021, and there was a time in which a majority were saying, oh, we're optimistic, or we're kind of neutral, we're uncertain. Now it is pretty clearly trending in this negative direction. I think that's worth noting. We dug one step deeper as well in the next slide. Not only are they more pessimistic, but we want to know why are they more pessimistic. So you'll see the number one reason for both the class of 2025, you'll see in the green line there, and then the class of 2026, which you're seeing the blue line there, tracking pretty similarly, more than 60% saying that the reason for their pessimism is because there's high competition for jobs right now, which if we were tracking the previous line chart, makes sense. What's notable is where that's growing between the class of 2025 and 2026. That's growing in notably both generative AI where it goes from about a third of students saying that they're pessimistic about their careers because of generative AI to close to half saying that, and then political climate and just general job security. So it's very notable that this is increasingly becoming a concern or a reason for pessimism for students. Next slide. And I think two quotes kind of bring this to the fore, one from a computer science student and one from a product design student, both of which I think can see AI pop up in very meaningful, tactile ways right now. The computer science student, class of 2026, said, "We only scratched the surface of what AI can do. There's a chance it creates more jobs in different roles, but without knowing that for sure, it's hard to see a future without AI taking over." And then similarly, the product design student, this pessimism comes through about everything feeling unstable and divided. It also feels like if AI really could have the ability to take over so much of what I would do in my own career, it's a scary feeling. And so putting aside a lot of like, is this, what can we attribute this? It's definitely resonating with students, and I think it's worth noting there. Yeah, Christine, do you have any, does this resonate with anything you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I host monthly career planning sessions with students through Handshake, and every month I get a few hundred students that come to these office hours
Mhm.
and ask questions. And I've seen a real increase in the concern that students have. They're just coming out into the job market, they're learning their functional area or their industry area. And they are, I think that second quote, AI could really have the ability to take over so much of what I would do. Um, is a sentiment that I am just hearing over and over again from students. Now, that being said, I don't actually feel like they're stuck. I think a
Mhm.
lot of students express that concern, but then they're also experimenting. They are
Mhm.
getting out there, they're using different AI tools, they're learning how to play with it, how to be creative with it, how to augment some of their work. So they
Mhm.
are also doing the things to build the skills that many of the employers in the chat have already said they would look for and want in a particular employee. So I think that is still very promising. But just because they're doing it doesn't necessarily mean that the sentiment or the fear goes away. It
That's a
just
great point.
means that they're trying to buffer it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
something. And I think the underlying tone that I often get from students around this is they would really love to get a better sense from prospective employers. What is the company's or
Mhm.
the employer's stance on how AI should be used, or what is their company's take on AI's role? And I think that actually gives
Mhm.
students a lot more comfort in knowing, oh, okay, so this is actually an employer that believes AI could be a helpful tool, but it's not necessarily something that will like replace folks. And so I think that's a really powerful thing that employers on the line, if that's not defined at your company, perhaps really engaging folks in that conversation and then making sure that that is something you're communicating to prospective applicants.
I love that. Yeah. And something we covered last week too that kind of hits on that, which like there was when it came to students wanting like training for to use AI tools or wanting to like learn the ins and outs of a tool, they're actually generally not looking for that. What they are looking for is guidance on how to actually implement it in. And I think we're all kind of figuring that out in many ways. Great. Kind of on these points, two interesting trends kind of stick out for us. One being we asked different majors from the class of 2026 if generative AI tools existed today for you when you started college, would you have chosen a different major? And I think it's pretty pronounced here, and it's something we've been seeing a lot. Not too often do we see humanities majors and computer science students feeling similar in terms of like their pessimism or their kind of like worry about the economy or their job prospects. But by and away, computer science students were the number one major to say that they would have chosen a different major had they known the AI thing. And you think about the class of 2026, it's really an interesting one. You enter into the pipeline, maybe a 4-year college career, and you choose what you're sold as a very lucrative, very highly needed one, and you exit to a job market that's very transformed for it. And I think that kind of speaks to what we're seeing here a bit. And then another interesting trend is when we cut across, and definitely a good observation there around health professions. It's something we continue to see in majors. We know the gray wave is coming. There's a high demand for health professions, so it's often kind of the least there is a lot of work in the healthcare system comparatively. So it's definitely an interesting one that we've been tracking as well. And then kind of getting at Christine's point too, and kind of the dichotomy between thinking about how students are looking at this and maybe the skills they actually have, and then how the employers are showing up here. We asked both hiring managers and students about their sentiment toward AI. And you'll track each one. Generative AI will create jobs. Generally, students, about half disagree with that. While you ask hiring managers, over 1,000 hiring managers, a majority say yes, AI will create jobs. There's this real pessimism coming from students and optimism coming from hiring managers. And I think that's just such an interesting take, especially for all of you on the line, especially those that have a Gen Z or a college grad in their life. It's like an interesting tension. And Christine, I'm wondering for you, like this split here, is there an opportunity here for employers? Like, how do you think about this split?
Yeah. I mean, it's not surprising, right? In the minds of a student, the employer essentially has control. They get to decide if
Yeah.
new jobs are going to be created or not. The student isn't deciding if new jobs are necessarily going to be created for them. So I can understand why for them it might feel less likely. They're more pessimistic about it. Whereas employers, depending on what level of the role is answering this particular survey, would have more optimism around, I believe, new things. Now, the other piece to keep in mind is for those
Yeah.
of us that are in the workforce, we have also seen different cycles. We have seen the advent of email. We have seen the advent of literally using the internet for work. Some people go back even farther than that and have seen other transformations in the workplace. And so they have seen and both recognized and now experienced multiple cycles of where new jobs are created. It is always easier to sometimes anchor in the fear of what is currently existing than the potential of what can come. And I
Mm,
think that is probably what we're seeing here with students. Some of them obviously haven't gone through a cycle of seeing some of this or experiencing it themselves. And because AI is developing so quickly, we don't have answers yet of exactly what all new types of positions might be. We're just starting to see the edges of what that looks like. I think we have a program called the Handshake AI Fellowship, and I think that's an example of a new type of contract part-time role that is high paying and uses students' deep domain expertise to actually help train LLMs in the post-training component. And that is something that honestly didn't exist 10 years ago. That wasn't something that was a regular job that students could have while they're actually in college and to use to supplement their experience. That actually is a very common role that many college students now can do that teaches them skills, that teaches them the limitations of how it works. And that is an example of something new that has been created. And there will be more and there will be others. We just don't know exactly what those might look like yet.
interesting.
Mhm.
Anna in the chat saying that it's a buyer's market, and that's an interesting way to sum it up as well. And then Karita said the emergence of AI reminds them of how they felt at the beginning of the pandemic. It felt like it was changing the tires while the car was driving down the road. Uncertainty, pessimism, but the feeling of we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting take as well.
Mhm.
Okay. And so like let's think about the final section because I think this one for me is the future state. This is a little bit of perspective, like pulling out and thinking about what we know about the hiring market beyond AI. What do I think about early talent and what do kind of this information? I'm curious to see what the chat thinks, Christine, what you think. When we think about like what the hiring needs will be in the future, and there's a lot we don't know, like what does that look like? And so with the first slide here, you'll see that one employer said that AI is taking away from the workforce, but adding new and different roles, and very much what you were just citing, Christine. We found that 55% of employers believe AI will create more jobs, that there's been a 2x in AIs and titles of jobs on Handshake over the past 2 years, and that 70% of decision makers in hiring believe that AI will change the skills required for entry-level roles. Very much seeing that in the chat right now. Additionally, I think there's kind of real demographic and macroeconomic conditions that might say that entry-level talent will continue to be a very critical part of what's going on. So on the next slide, you'll see the demographic cliff, which we've been hearing about in higher ed for a very long time, but also it's something that is, I think, very important to, I think, understanding like one number that gets us there. Every year since 2008, the birth rate has dropped about 1%. What that actually translates to is between now there and 2039 is there will be 15% fewer 18-year-olds if you want to really quantify that. So it's like a subtle shift, but it's one that will make, I think it very much a society that is top heavy that requires in like the healthcare profession, folks to really increasingly take care of an aging population. One economist projected that this worker shortage of this magnitude will be one that we haven't seen since World War II. And I bring this in here because I think it's worth considering when we're thinking about AI's eliminating early talent. Is that necessarily true or tenable for the future? Something to consider. On the next slide is the flip side of this. So if on one hand you have a shrinking birth rate, on the other hand you have a wave of retirements. And a very similar quote from a different economist saying that we are in the early stages of the largest retirement-driven workforce turnover in our nation's history. The baby boomer generation, what might be called the peak boomer generation, the last cohort of boomers, between through the end of the decade, about more than 30 million will be set to retire or of retirement age. That is a lot of turnover within organizations. We think about 240K is the number of monthly hires that we'll need to kind of replace those groupings. And then 10% is about the average loss in over 18 industries over the next 5 years. So that kind of drills down on the next slide to different industries. It will result in very different feelings throughout each industry. But I say all this because think about your industry, find your industry here. But I think you kind of know about the knowledge transfer and the need, even with AI, to kind of continue different functions and organizations over time. And it's something that when we say early talent hiring is going away, I think it doesn't consider a lot of these very large factors. Finally, and we'll kind of speed through these a little bit, but I think it gets to the skill point that not only is it that like there will be fewer numbers of hires that we will need to fewer folks that will need like be available to be hired, but as well different skills will be needed. We're already seeing on Handshake across different industries a notable 4x to 5x increase in the number of job roles mentioning skills like generative AI. And then in external research, on the next slide, you'll see that Gen Z is by far the fastest adopter of Gen AI tools. So when we think about workers currently, in July 2023, about a third of 18 to 29-year-olds used ChatGPT, but that was close to double the national average. Since then, that inflection has been steepest amongst this cohort. This is a group that is exiting and interestingly being the most knowledgeable on quote generative AI skills. They are using it the most and I think have a lot to contribute in terms of digital transformation for organizations. That's also validated with our data where we found that only 19% are saying they're not using it at all, while 24% are using it on a daily basis and 13%, which is just an increase of 11 percentage points since the class of 2024. So that's all to say, this is a cohort too that is leaving with probably the best perspective on generative AI and interested in using it. And we'll close here with one slide just on the skills that employers are saying they are looking for. 70% of hiring managers say they expect generative AI skills to be more important. And you'll see across every domain here, besides writing code and creating content, which might have a smaller size, the vast majority, close to 85% across everyone, say that it is somewhat or very important that new early talent hires have these skills. And so, Christine, any reactions to kind of that wave of both demographic shifts and skill shifts?
Well, I think the demographic shifts is super fascinating because you're right, it truly isn't talked about at all in any of the articles when people are talking about AI and the impact that that's going to have. And I do think that in the grand scheme of things will probably equal out given the high number of retirement, the lower number of literally children being born and therefore college graduates being available. So in some ways, this will all sort of equal itself out. That being said, that does not change the immediate impact or experience for a class of 2025, a class of 2026, maybe even class of 2027 graduate. And so on an individual level, I can very much understand the angst and the
Mm,
anxiety and the feelings that those graduates and probably their parents and
yeah.
families have for them. Like that is still very real and very palpable, even if on aggregate things will probably all level out in the long term. I think when it comes to these particular skills, I know you and I were kind of talking about this
Mm,
before. I think this is a pretty comprehensive sort of list, and I think it was very much affirmed by a lot of the conversation in the chat today from the employers that are on the line in terms of how they would expect or want students to use some of these skills. I think it's been really interesting as we've watched our Handshake AI fellowship program evolve to see some of the skills that are coming from those fellows and how they're learning about how to break a model, what the limitations are for LLMs, how to truly use it within their discipline or domain area, how they're able to then take that to their interview or to their new entry level job. I know many fellows have actually said that's been really helpful as they've had conversations with prospective employers. I think that's really exciting. I do think the one piece of this conversation around skills that you and I have not had yet this morning is the importance of all of the soft skills or durable skills, core skills, whatever people want to call it, that, in my opinion, will be ever more important as AI becomes a bigger and bigger presence in all of our lives. And a few people mentioned it in the chat throughout this session. Things like communication, having good judgment, being able to discern, critical thinking, conflict management. Like these are a lot of those sort of human people skills that will
mm,
be very inevitable, not replaced by AI, and will truly separate sort of the good from great
mm.
employees moving forward. And I think that's actually a really big piece that our higher education partners can continue to really lean in on in figuring out how to foster that within the college experience for a lot of our students. And I would encourage our employers to really be thinking about how you also screen and assess for that in the interview process beyond just the productivity, efficiency, and functional area knowledge as well.
I love that. So I think taking all of this away, a lot of information was shared, and I think we covered a lot of ground, but I think it's undeniable that early talent will still be needed and still
Mm.
be very important, and especially brings a lot of skills that I think are increasingly more important. We'll close out with a key takeaway for teams summing all of this up, but also open it up for Q&A because I think there's already been some really interesting questions. We know that the majority of employers still believe entry-level positions are essential for future success. 83% say that entry-level hires are key for their future success. 73% find that entry-level candidates are more comfortable using this tech than senior employers and maybe have a lot to contribute there. And 71% agree that entry-level hires add immediate value to their organization. I think if you're on the line, you're likely interested and probably in agreement because you are engaging with this a lot. But Christine, any big picture takeaways from all this to add?
I think you've covered it, honestly, Randy. You've done such a good job of giving all the references and really tying it all together.
Wow, I love that. Let me know in the chat if you agree. Okay, we'll switch to Q&A. On the next slide, we're going to show a poll here, just a real quick question, and we'll be able to share out right away the information. How is your organization using or planning to use AI in recruiting specifically? There's sourcing and outreach, candidate matching, interviews, tracking and analysis, analytics. So let us know there, and we'll report out the results as we go through. Cool. And in the meantime, as we wait for that, let us know in the chat if you have any reactions to the research, if there's any questions. I believe there's a Q&A function we could use as well. But we would love to continue the conversation. We actually, this is the first time we had a question submitted before the webinar. So this first question that we'll pose is, as AI continues to change entry-level roles, what steps can I take to make myself more valuable to my company? Are there any free or accessible training resources that can help me build skills that will remain in demand? So I have a few reactions to this. I'm curious, Christine, your immediate reaction.
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in. There are definitely some free and accessible training resources. A lot of the different labs actually provide
Mm.
a number of really amazing, good online learning components that can just get you like strong foundational understanding of how some of the LLMs work, what you can do, how you can build some agents. Anthropic's suite of classes in particular is often cited as one of the easiest in terms of how they break down all of the concepts and how they train folks. Very digestible, very short, very easy. So I would highly recommend some of their components. I think you can also just play around with something. So for example, ChatGPT has ChatGPT careers. I would encourage all of you to go check that out, play around with it, familiarize yourself with it, see what works well, what doesn't work well. With your function within your functional area, I would also highly recommend that you chat with other colleagues in your space to ask them what tools are you using. I assume the majority of folks on the line are in HR, people and talent, that area. So I would talk to other people and talent folks to actually see like what are you using around some of your sourcing needs or top of funnel or interviewing and get a sense of what those are, crowdsource that, and then literally go play around with some of these. Many of these platforms have free models that you can use first before you pay for an upgrade or your company pays for any kind of subscription. So I would play around with some of those things just to get yourself a little bit more familiar and start to build some of the skills and figure out where it can actually augment your work. And then there have been a few people in the chat already that have also talked about them building their own agents. And I think that's also a great place to start too, is you can also, if you have an idea of something that you wanted to build, you could use a platform like Lovable, which
Mm.
will allow you to actually create an agent that can automate and do some of the things that you don't want to do, some of the rote tasks. So those are all easy ways that you can kind of experiment a little bit and build some of those skills. So those would be my suggestions. Randy, what are yours?
Yeah, no, I immediately go back to what you said about like the most important thing, but the hardest thing, which is like the soft skills are important. I think about how quickly these labs are releasing new updates and how powerful they can be. So I think everything you're saying, Christine, about like oftentimes, sometimes the training is like we're looking for like this is going to stay. Like if I take an Excel course and I'm like, this is going to teach me all the formulas and I'll be ready, like, it's going to stay, Excel is going to stay Excel for a while. A lot of these models are getting better or improving or changing the way you interact with them. So I think the agility that we're suggesting hiring for critical thinking and kind of discernment is actually that's going to be the thing that keeps up. And I think similarly, how I don't think a lot of the core skills that are, even if you can write Python through
Yep.
ChatGPT now, I think like that last 10% about you being able to review that code and be like, oh, I know that that is kind of wrong and that's going to break everything is
Mhm.
still really quick, like important. And I think it's like for those that are definitely worried about this stuff, I think for students, I really do feel for students because I think they were trained in definitely a specific one, but they've also been experimenting a lot. So I think they're probably the at the forefront of experimentation for things. But it's a willingness to be like, hey, I have to continue learning or just have to like be ready for things to shift, and that's okay. This is how I think this is ultimately what I need from this. So I think everything
Yeah.
you said plus that.
Actually, Randy, I would also add to like what you were just saying is it's just generally good practice in all
Mm,
of our careers to know what your superpower is and whatever that is to like double down on that.
mm,
So like now's the time to actually refine it, sharpen it, get even better at some of those components. And really lean into it because that is a way for you to show value not only to your current organization, but when you decide that it's time for you to move on to your next organization,
mm.
to really be able to continue leaning in that direction for those types of things. So, if that's public speaking, if that's research, if that's strategy, there's a
Mm.
number of different things that I'm sure folks on the line have superpowers in, but really honing in on that and being aware of what that is just good practice, generally speaking.
I love that. And if you feel comfortable sharing those superpowers, I'm curious what folks in the chat are coming out with. Okay, so we have a question and then we have the webinar results. So the question is, what sources are you seeing AI pull information from? Any way employers can influence these sources? It's an interesting one. I think my knee-jerk reaction to this, and Christine, I'm curious your take too, but my knee-jerk reaction is that generally these like very powerful models that the leading AI labs are releasing are trained on incomprehensible amounts of data, and so they are good general purpose. Where the opportunity then becomes for your workflow or your organization, it doesn't have the deep context knowledge that you probably hold. So I think that is very important in like the building agents and being able to understand where this really powerful brain that might not know a lot about your particular organization is guiding it to those places. So I think that is one. And then another piece is like thinking about like things like SEO used to pull from the web generally, and now it's very much being from like thinking about how these models are pulling that information, and it likes data a lot. So thinking that it's biased toward data and like how facts and things like that. So
Yeah.
Christine, I'm curious your take on that question.
Yeah, and actually, let me also answer a follow-up question from the chat
Mhm.
from Joanne and Deborah. The training that I was referring to was Anthropic. So Anthropic has a number of online courses that you can take just to get up to speed if that's what you're trying to do in terms of your AI knowledge. So that was Anthropic.
Cool.
Okay, so to the question around sources. So I think what's really important to know is keep in like if you're thinking about large language models in particular, large language models get trained essentially two ways, pre-training and post-training. The pre-training is exactly what Randy was just talking about, right? It sort of has absorbed the corpus of information that exists out there in the internet, in the world. It's sort of already taken all of those components. And so the sources that it's actually pulling from is essentially like what already exists when you're like doing a Google search, right? It's like pulling from all of those different sources. The post-training component is what I think is also very, very interesting, and this is actually why I have a lot of I guess belief and excitement around some of the stuff that we're doing around Handshake AI. So this other component of our company, Handshake AI, we partner with all of the frontier labs to help provide human trainers that help do post training on their large language models within their deep domain areas. So think you're a chemist, you're a biologist, you're an entomologist, you're a music theory, you're an educator, and so you actually help to train these LLMs on really niche questions, prompts, and areas related to your domain area. That's essentially what we're doing. So we have a number of students in graduate programs that are helping to further refine these LLMs and become part of their sources in this knowledge. And the reason this excites me is because we need a wide array of people, backgrounds, academic disciplines to help shape what the LLMs are pulling from and where they're getting that information from. And the best way to do that is to have a really diverse group of individuals that are helping to provide that information and training. So that's my answer to that one is just it's coming from a lot of different places, some of which we all know and assume, and some of which maybe some folks were not as familiar with how some of the post training is continuing to be refined right now.
It's fascinating. Super fascinating. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. I want to share out the results of the poll. So how is your organization using or planning to use AI in recruiting? Uh, I guess folks probably see this already, but I will just read it out loud. The number one reason like a use case being sourcing and outreach, followed by candidate matching and screening at 25%, 24%, tracking analytics, and last being interviews. So really good to know there. So closing out, thank you all for joining and contributing questions and keeping a very active Friday chat. One thing we want to talk about is the grand finale, which is kind of a wrap up to the back to school season. Attendees here can get early access with that end of the year event. If you like these insights, we're actually going to debut some year in review. So kind of our Spotify wrapped of like everything that's happened. So feel free to scan the QR code. I believe someone will be dropping the registration link here. There it is. Yeah, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.